Welcome, everyone. My name is Marina Dawn Wells. I am Assistant Curator of History and Culture at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And the Whaling Museum, if you're not familiar with us, ignites learning through explorations of art, history, science, and culture rooted in the stories of people, the region, and an international seaport. So I'm so thrilled today to bring together this wonderful local history guild. This was actually sort of prompted by an exhibition that we've just installed called Overheard Underwater by Perry Lynch Howard. And you can see that at the museum right now. Howard's multimedia artistic practice has created this really amazing, immersive underwater soundscape and visualizations from her field recordings that connect people to the life of our oceans and coastal waterways. So she has transformed this Center Street gallery at the museum, if you're familiar, into an underwater vessel and an immersive soundscape using recordings from our collections. So with that all in mind, this Local History Guild, our quarterly Zoom program that knits together different ideas from art, history, science, and culture, is a little different this month because we are focusing more on the science part of things. And so we've invited a couple of our incredibly accomplished marine mammal scientists here today to speak on their work and be in conversation with the one and only Bob Rocha of the museum to discuss this changing world of underwater marine mammal sound and ocean noise. So I'll introduce them first and they'll share their work and then we'll be in conversation and welcome audience questions. And generally we go for about an hour. It might go a hair over if the conversation is lively, but we really appreciate you all in the audience coming for as long as you're able. So with no further ado, I'll read their bios and then we can get started. So Bob Rocha is the Associate Curator of Science and Research at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, where he has worked since 2004. His major responsibilities at the museum include developing all science content for museum exhibits, cataloging and managing the natural history collection, and serving as liaison to agencies and partners. In his time at the museum, he's also been responsible for developing and presenting science curricula for school groups, creating and managing the high school apprenticeship program, managing and training the museum's volunteer corps, developing outreach programs, developing science programs for general audiences, and providing professional development for teachers. Welcome, Bob. Then we will have Laela Sayigh, who received her PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology / Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which you might hear as the MIT/WHOI program. Those who are familiar, Woods Hole, we abbreviate as WHOI. You might hear that more than once today. And she also got her BA from the University of Pennsylvania. Her research focuses on social behavior and communication of cetaceans, also known as whales and dolphins. And her current projects focus on a variety of species, and they're both basic, such as looking at call structure and function, and applied, for example, looking at effects of anthropogenic noise on communication and developing an acoustic mass stranding alert system. She's been involved with a long-term study of bottlenose dolphins in waters near Sarasota, Florida for many years, where her work has focused on individually distinctive signature whistles. Most recently, this research has involved playback experiments to free-swimming dolphins filmed with drones to study functions of other whistle types. Given the challenges of studying species that spend most of their lives underwater, she's involved in research that utilizes new technologies such as non-invasive tags to study cetacean communication systems. And she is currently senior research specialist at WHOI and professor of animal behavior at Hampshire College. So welcome, Laela. And last but certainly not least, we'll have Dr. Susan Parks, who's a professor of biology at Syracuse University, and she's been involved with animal bioacoustics research for over 25 years. She earned her BA in biology from Cornell University and her PhD in biological oceanography in the MIT Hui Joint Program in Oceanography. Her research focuses on the ecology and evolution of acoustic signaling in baleen whales. Dr. Park's research topics span the fields of behavioral ecology, bioacoustics, biological oceanography, and conservation biology. And her current projects include studies of marine mammals, ranging from observational studies characterizing the acoustic behavior of species to experimental studies investigating behavioral functions of sounds and the impacts of noise on communications. So I'm so thrilled to welcome the three of you, and I'm excited to hear more. And with that, we will start with Bob.
And I have to find my presentation. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thrilled to be able to do this and be part of this. And so when Marina and I were having this conversation several weeks ago as to who could be on this panel, Susan and Laela's names were two of the first about their work, and I know how much time they've spent in the field and how important their work is to the field of marine bioacoustics. So it's fun for me to be able to be part of this. So I will be brief because what I'd like to do, since the Whaling Museum and myself specifically are probably the prime beneficiaries of the gift received from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution back in 2015. I talk a little bit about what the gift is, what the resources are, and how they've been used since we've taken possession of them. And I have to give credit to former docent David Blanchett, who created this silly cartoon on the cover here. Okay. So in 2015, we received a great gift that further distinguished us as a competitive scholastic research center in whale conservation. And I've actually taken a little bit of this text from a press release that went out back then. So this gift of the William Watkins collection of marine mammal sound recordings includes a lot of objects, whether it's reel-to-reel tapes, photographs, tags, recording instruments, and a lot of other things that are up there in storage. And there's a nice photo there of Dr. Watkins with some of the gear that I don't think too many people know how to use anymore. This stuff has been around a while. And some other names that need a little bit of credit here because they were part of these objects and these recordings. The names. And there's the vessel, the Able J, which was the platform for a lot of marine bioacoustic research. And then this digital collection of those 18,000 calls, 70 of those, I mean, those are 70 species of marine mammal, 51 are voucher recordings. The first one being the beluga. And the last of those voucher recordings from 1975, the beluga was from 1949, and this last one from 1975 is the Heavisides dolphin. So if you were to come into the Whaling Museum and go up on our mezzanine level, and you wanted to see what some of these objects were, this is what you would see. So going from left to right or from south to north, see that little inset there with the stool. So if you wanted to come in and listen to these best of cuts from the Laela Watkins collection of sound recordings, and I just got that name, and I got all those words in the wrong order, but you know what I mean? You could sit and listen, and it's fun to walk past that when people have sat themselves down and begin to choose things and just listen in. And then that picture next to them is a good one of Doctors Watkins and Cheville. Cheville is seated. And then a little bit to the right of that, you see this case here with a lot of gear, with some of the images, some of the X-rays and images of species studied. And then to the right of that, this one's a little more of a cultural angle to the things that were collected, researched, all with a focus on whales. And that yellow chart on the top is of the Saguenay River, and it was that with that pressing to the right of it, the vinyl pressing, that was that first voucher recording made of a beluga in that river when Beaucheville and his wife were on honeymoon. And then below that, we have some of the research tools that have been donated. And I had to put that little sign on the top middle there that says research tools, because there's a lot of folks who come in not knowing anything about the whaling industry, and they think this is what was used to kill the whales. These things didn't necessarily feel good to the whales when they were implanted in their bodies, but they certainly weren't used for whale hunting. They were used to listen to the animals. So one of my tasks now is to manage the requests for the audio files that come in either through Woods Hole or through the Whaling Museum. And Laela and I were just exchanging emails about this earlier today. So just to give you a sense, over the last 3 years, where a handful of the requests have come from. We have one that came to us from Germany. He wanted to connect the audio files to a world map as to where these recordings were made. So you can see the bubble chart there of where all these recordings were made. This one came from a partner museum in Iceland. They have a whaling museum there, which is located on a pier where the vessels that were there used to leave to go whale hunting. Now they leave from there to go whale watching. So they asked for some files to use for their school programs. This one came in from National Geographic Partners to create a research article. They wanted some bowhead clips. This is a working documentary right now. It isn't finished, but they're calling it The Walrus and Me. So obviously they wanted some walrus clips. And this is a more recent request. They wanted to go through all the clips, whether it's the best of clip or just anything in the database. There's a lot of people working on learning models, and this is a big data set, and this is a way for these folks to test their coding and their programming. And to dive a little more into one that I just read about this morning, this one came in, and you can see it went, he pointed out the fact that the data set is, these files are at different ages, different lengths, different quality, and they really had to test the model that they made. Is a diagram of from their research paper. So it's good to know that this database serves as a crucial case study for machine learning applications for natural data sets. And Marina mentioned this a few minutes ago. We've opened a new exhibition just a couple of weeks ago called Overheard Underwater by Perry Lynch Howard. And you can see in that quote there that if we save quiet, we save so much more too. And we know that unlike what Jacques Cousteau originally thought, the ocean is not a quiet place. The animals in it certainly make a lot of noise. Mother Nature makes a lot of noise in the ocean, and then along come humans, and we've been adding to that noise. And I know that Laela and Susan will talk about that in just a few minutes. But what's really cool with what Perry did was, she makes use of audio files and spectrograms and some of our hardware, and she turns it into this fantastic art. So this image on the left, there's actually, that's one of the walls of the gallery, which is basically wallpaper now, where it's a combination of spectrograms, photographs, and she's made a multi-layer image to cover the wall. And actually, I should say cover the walls. And one of our cases right there, you can see a couple of well, one's a reel to reel. See the case there, and then the box for that. And these all come from the collection. And then from another part of our holdings, you see a pair of sperm whale bullae, the air bones. And there's also a listening station just above the plaza. So on the left, you could put on those headphones and you can patch into a live audio feed from Disco Bay, Greenland, and it just plays, as long as their internet is running, you can listen to the sounds of the harbor. Sometimes you don't hear anything, sometimes you hear vessels, sometimes you hear animals, sometimes you hear animals and vessels. Pretty cool. And then on the right, that listening station there is a couple of different recordings that have been posted. And I should also add, when you go into the gallery, that's the one with that large photo on the right, there are 6 or 7 different files that play on a loop. 1 or 2 are of people, but more of them are of different animals. And these are clips taken from the audio file. So there's bowhead whale, there's humpback, and there's bearded seal. And if you've never listened to a bearded seal before, you definitely should. Because I can't imagine how long it took for someone to realize that that sound was actually coming from an animal. Sounds like a descending whistle. It can be really loud. And along with that, the U.S. Navy, for decades through their Office of Naval Research, has funded a great deal of marine bioacoustic research, the sound of an enemy submarine from the sound of an animal in the water. And in so doing, they've created a listening kiosk like this, which gives anybody a chance to put on the headphones and listen in to a variety of sounds, whether it's animal made or human made. And along with that, one of Laela's friends and colleagues, Anya Driscoll Lind, her husband Jan, and I worked on a grade 6 physical science curriculum, which we've pilot tested here in the city. And we do a lot with Watkins audio and a whole lot of research that Anya and Jan have done, and we've all blended this together. And I'll actually present a little bit on this at the end of the month at the National Marine Educators Association annual conference. But you can see that we can do this because we have access to these files. And the last thing that I'll mention is that because some of the audio files are of seals and sea lions, pinnipeds, we were inspired to work with a really interesting, creative, clever team that involved a scientist, an illustrator, a writer, and a TEK practitioner to create a traveling exhibition that blends all of those aspects, facets, points of views for a really comprehensive, attractive traveling exhibition, which we expect actually to be setting up at the National Marine Life Center in about 3 weeks. And it'll be there for the month of July. Then we believe it's heading up to the Aquina Cultural Center for August. And it has appeared in a variety of places already. So, and with that, I believe that is my last slide. Hope that gives you a good overview of what the museum has done with these files. And I'm gonna unshare, and Laela, you get to go next.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen. I just have to get the right mode here. All right. There we go. I want you to see the other view. All right. I hope you're seeing the slide view mode
Yep,
now.
yep.
Oh, you are. Okay, thank
Why
you.
study sound in the ocean? Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, because for some reason my view just kind of disappeared. I'm not sure where it went. So yes, well, I'm glad to be here with all of you today, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about some background about sound in the ocean, and also then a little bit about my own work. And so yeah, so to start with, why study sound in the ocean? I would just point out that very little sunlight actually penetrates into the ocean. It's pretty much all absorbed in that top 100 meters or so. And so the rest of the ocean is very dark and can't really see much what's going on there. Whereas in contrast, a sound, sound travels a lot better underwater than light in general, as well as, it can penetrate obviously all depths. And this is an example showing that one of the low frequency sounds produced by a fin or a blue whale could potentially travel all the way from Bermuda all the way up to Newfoundland, Canada, about a 2,500 kilometer distance. This isn't to say that we think they actually do communicate across such large distances, but just the fact that sound could travel that far gives you a sense of, how powerful sound can be underwater. It's just a very, very efficient and very efficient method of communication. And cetaceans do take advantage of that. So pretty much all, I think I can actually say all cetaceans, which are the whales, dolphins, and porpoises shown here, use sound as their primary mode of communication. And they also use it for other things like echolocation. The tooth species on the right here use echolocation as a way to find prey, etc. So this slide is just showing, again, the kind of diversity of cetaceans with the large baleen whales on the left, and then the more diverse tooth species over on the right. Yeah, so they all use sound. And just a little bit of a recap of what Bob just presented. I did want to mention that marine mammal bioacoustics, the field, was actually born at Hui in the 1940s. And these pioneers, Bill Watkins and Bill Cheville, recorded over 50 marine mammal species for the first time, as Bob mentioned. And so just as a shout out to going to see that cool exhibit, that of all of the materials from Hui of theirs that were donated to the New Bedford Whaling Museum, where they're actually being used for all sorts of cool things. I was so excited to see all of that. But today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about my own work, which really focuses primarily on dolphin communication, and in particular this species of dolphin, the bottlenose, which is the one most likely that you might see if you went to a public display facility of any kind. These guys have been kind of in the public eye for a long time. This Gary Larson cartoon is one of my favorites that highlights sort of popular ideas about dolphin communication, with a bunch of scientists kind of too dumb to understand what's going on, tallying these obvious Spanish phrases on a blackboard. But I hope that that's not an accurate representation. We actually do know a fair bit about their communication, and I'll give you just a little background first. A very early discovery back in the 1960s was that they make name-like signature whistles. And that discovery was made by this husband-wife team here, Melba and David Caldwell. They were actually some of the names on the slide that Bob mentioned. So their original tapes are actually part of the Watkins collection. And so they did a lot of recordings and found by recording isolated animals that in this context in public display kind of facility, that they do produce these individually distinctive sounds. So that was a really, really important finding, and one that I've continued to work on quite a bit myself. And I'll play a few examples for you. Oh, I don't know if I did the share thing. Sorry, I just remembered that I have to. Oh yeah, no, I did. Yay. Okay. So sorry. Let me go back to my thing here. So hopefully you're still seeing everything fine. I just wasn't sure if I shared sound. So, okay, I'm gonna play that sound for you. That's one signature whistle. And what you're looking at here are called spectrograms, or plots of frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. So these are visual representations of sound that are very commonly what we use to study them, because often a lot of the frequencies in dolphin whistles are actually too high for us to hear. And some species, they're too low, some of the baleen whales. This one now, and this one, and one more. It's kind of quiet, but hopefully you can get a sense of just the diversity. They're very, very variable and very distinctive. And since the Caldwell's time, most of what we've learned about signature whistles has come from a long-term research program in Sarasota, Florida, that focuses on a resident community of about 170 dolphins. And this has been going on since 1970, this research program. And in the mid-1980s, we started to or collaborate with them on making acoustic recordings. And this population is really like a natural laboratory. All of the animals are known, their known age, sex, their matrilineal relatedness. So everybody's mom and grandmother and great grandmother, et cetera, is known up to 6 generations. So it's a really fantastic place to work. And we do these brief catch and release health assessments. This is one visualized here, where we can put this large net in shallow water around a small group of animals. And then a lot of these people are veterinarians. And this is also very heavily permitted by the federal government. But so we really can get a lot of information during these brief catch and release health assessments. And one of the things that we do is that we actually record these known individual dolphins with suction cup hydrophones that we can put right on their melon or forehead, which you can see there. And we also, before they're released, can attach these suction cup attached D tags, which were actually developed at WHOI. And these are very powerful tools that I think you're going to hear some more about maybe from Susan. And they can record sounds as well as the movements of the animals. So they really give us a lot of information. And so over the many years now that we've been recording down there in Sarasota, we've built this large database of whistles called the Sarasota Dolphin Whistle Database. And this image is showing one signature whistle or name from each of 269 individual dolphins. They're not all alive at the moment, but ones that we've recorded over the years. So it's really, it's just a very unique data set to be able to collect this kind of data from so many known individual dolphins. And we've used it for a lot of really fun things. We're continuing to use it pretty much every day. It seems like we come up with some new thing to look at. But one example from a study that we did a couple of years ago was we were able to focus on a subset of the data from some dolphin females that we had recorded in 2 contexts, both when they were with a calf and without a calf. And we were able to compare their signature whistles in these contexts and found that they do something similar to what is called motherese in humans, where we speak in kind of a higher pitched, more sing-songy kind of voice when we're talking to infants or small children. And we actually found that dolphins females do increase the frequency of their signature whistles when they're communicating with their calves. And I have one example down here I can play for you. So the first one, and these are slowed down 8 times, by the way, but hopefully you can hear. So the first one is when she's not with her calf, or without her calf, and the second one, she's with her calf. So hopefully you'll be able to hear that the second one goes up higher. So, okay, so that's was a really fun thing to find, that we kind of share that feature of communication with them. And I didn't play that again. But now another thing that my research has really been focusing on for the last few years has been switching gears to look at non-signature whistles. And only since we've been able to catalog and identify all of the whistles, the signature whistles in the population, have we been able to start looking at these whistles that we call non-signature whistles, which are simply whistles other than the signature. And it's been kind of amazing that since we've really started looking at these, we found they're just all over the place. We used to kind of think they were sort of random whistles, but now we know they definitely are not. And this slide shows some examples. On the left is the one that we call type A, that's produced by at least 25 animals. I mean, this is just a preliminary count, this very unusual sort of steep up, down, up sweep. And then this one on the right, type B, we've seen produced by at least 35 different animals, and it's sort of a variable beginning portion followed by this very flat frequency component, which is very unusual in dolphin whistles. So, at least in Sarasota. So these have been really, really fascinating to start looking at. And we really are trying to figure out what their functions are. And to do this, we're doing playback experiments where we actually lower a underwater speaker under the water and then film their reactions with drones. And sometimes they have tags on at the same time too. But I will show you some example videos of some of these experiments so you can see what like the response. The little speaker icon down there at the bottom is showing where playback's coming from. In this case, the dolphins turn forward and swim toward the playback stimulus. And in this avoidance response, the whistle, and you can see that the dolphin turns away and swims away from the stimulus. In this interest response, the dolphin turns toward the stimulus and then basically remains in place, investigating it. And in this ambiguous response, the dolphin initially turn away from the stimulus and then turn toward the stimulus. So one of the take-homes of our results from these playbacks so far is that this is a complex communication system. So it's not going to be an easy sort of one-size-fits-all interpretation for any of these sounds. But that's kind of what we expected, and it also is what makes it more interesting. I mean, if you think about even our, in our own case, a person is not going to respond even to their own name in the same way in different contexts. It will depend a lot on what they're doing, who they're with, what their recent interactions have been with other people, etc. So we think that these types of things are in play with dolphins, which again makes it a lot more complicated, a lot more interesting too. And so just now in the last few minutes that I'm going to talk, I just wanted to mention a few conservation applications for our work in addition to these more basic questions that I just talked about and how these whistles function. So there are a few different aspects of they're more conservation oriented that we're working on, including measuring noise pollution, particularly relevant to and noise impacts on dolphins relevant to this presentation, as well as monitoring populations and predicting mass stranding. So I'm just going to talk for a minute about each of these. So starting with noise pollution and thinking about how noise might impact dolphin communication, I'm just going to play an example for you here that was recorded on a tag on a dolphin in Sarasota. And you'll hear the dolphin whistling, and then you'll hear a boat passing. So these types of events are very common on the tags. That when I encounter them, I typically take my headphones off. Of course, the dolphins can't do that, and they're exposed to these types of boat passages quite regularly throughout every day of their lives down there. So we are trying to look at some aspects of their communication that may be, that they may be modifying or varying to accommodate these high levels of noise. The second aspect that I was going to just talk briefly about is using signature whistles as a method to track known individuals. In Sarasota, we have this amazing network of hydrophones throughout the study area called the Sarasota Bay Listening Network. And we are trying to combine this, and I know there's a lot going on in this slide, but the basic take home here is that we're trying to combine this listening network with AI tools to recognize whistles in real time that we can match to our signature whistle database, as well as signals that may not be in our database that we might be able to cluster and actually potentially identify as new signature whistles. And we hope to, be able to implement methods like these for monitoring population size and engaging the community as well, for being able to listen to sounds in real time throughout the study area. And our real ultimate goal for developing these methods is that we might be able to then apply them to new locations and species where there aren't such extensive data sets like we have in Sarasota, but where, for example, there might be a population of dolphins that might be exposed to some kind of risk of some kind, where the population might be needing to be monitored. And so this type of methodology could potentially track even specific individual animals and monitor how they're moving or changing their movement patterns throughout a particular study area. And then the last one that I wanted to just mention is using whistles potentially as a tool for predicting mass stranding events. And this is very relevant in our neck of the woods in Cape Cod. It is a hot spot for dolphin strandings, especially that area that's very dark yellow there, which is Wellfleet Harbor. And in fact, the largest stranding ever documented in US history happened in Wellfleet Harbor last June. 140 dolphins. And this is just showing me over here on the right in the Wellfleet Harbor Master's boat with a recorder, because we've actually been recording sounds in Wellfleet Harbor for the past 10 years, trying to see if we can document sounds, any sounds that might be predictive of mass stranding events. And so the goal of this work, again, is to see if there are any acoustic cues that we can use that could potentially give stranding responders advance warning to get them out there sooner, to be able to push animals offshore, which would definitely increase the success of survival rate of these animals. So with that, I just wanted to mention that all of the work that I described today is highly collaborative, involves many, many people, which I can't possibly name, but I just wanted to mention that it sort of takes a village. And I think with that, I will end and pass it on over to Susan.
Great. Thanks, Laela. Yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk about my work, and I'll be sort of picking up where Laela left off, talking about baleen whale communication with a species that's local to New Bedford, the North Atlantic right whale. So let me just share my slides. All right. So a lot of the work that I do focuses on using the suction cup acoustic recording tags that Laela described to try to understand the acoustic behavior of large whales. And so unlike the dolphins that are close to shore in Sarasota, these large whales have very long distance migrations, and they're moving along the entire east coast of the US. And so trying to get snapshots into their life and how they use sound has been sort of a major focus of my career. And so I'll share some of the findings that we've had. So first, just to put a little bit of context for the types of tools that we use for collecting data. So this is a really nice infographic that was produced by the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Woods Hole. And so it shows all sorts of tools that are used for listening to sounds in the ocean, and that we use for conservation efforts to try to detect and protect a lot of the species that produce sounds in the ocean. And in the bottom right-hand corner of this image, you see a zoom in of a D tag, an acoustic tag that was developed by Mark Johnson and Peter Tyack at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on the back of a humpback whale. And so that's essentially the primary tool I'll be talking about today. So usually when I give presentations, people always want to see how we put the tags on the whales. This is actually sort of old-fashioned technology. We have moved forward a little bit in recent years, but this is a video that was taken in Cape Cod Bay of putting a suction cup tag on the back of a North Atlantic right whale. And so the real secret to it is making sure your boat's in the right place at the right time. So this boat is essentially stationary, and the whale just we could predict where the whale was going to surface and be in position to be able to put the tag on. More recently, we've moved to using unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. They're able to carry these small tags. And so we can actually, we've been working with Ocean Alliance and using this to deploy the tags on a number of large whale species, where they can launch the drone from the boat, and we can put a tag on a whale that's 1 kilometer from the boat in, like 2 or 3 minutes. And so that's really changed our ability to collect data in the past 2 or 3 years. But the data that I want to talk about today are from case studies of acoustic tags that have been placed on North Atlantic right whales through a number of projects with a lot of collaborators over the past 25 years. Like the Sarasota dolphin population, the North Atlantic right whale is also a very well-studied population. This is due to its highly endangered nature. There are fewer than 350 North Atlantic right whales left in the world, and they are located off the east coast of the US and Canada. And as a result of this, there's a huge effort. The North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium is a team of scientists, educators, conservation biologists, and government scientists that work together towards the conservation goals of this species. And through that, there is a catalog. And so if I take a photograph of a North Atlantic right whale and submit that photo, I can get the life history of that individual. I can find out what sex it is, its age, its relatedness to the other animals that it's with. And so that was what initially, as a graduate student, drew me to this species, because by taking a picture without actually doing anything to the animal, you could get a lot of information about the context of the individual. So what sounds do right whales make? So unlike the whistles of dolphins, the sounds produced by right whales are generally lower in frequency. I generally study these large baleen whales, and often I think I'm drawn to the species that you can hear most of the time without any modification to the signals. And so this is, again, a spectrogram with time on the x-axis and frequency on the y-axis. And right whales produce a variety of tonal low frequency calls. If you're used to humpback whale song, you might be somewhat disappointed. North Atlantic right whales are somewhere between a cow-elephant hybrid, I think, in their sound production. So when I started doing research on North Atlantic right whales, there had been a really outstanding study done of a closely related species, the southern right whale, that's found in the southern hemisphere. But there had been relatively little published other than what Bill Watkins had written and recorded for North Atlantic right whales. And so one of the first questions was really whether all right whales, all North Atlantic right whales, make the same sounds. Do they have signature whistles similar to the dolphins, or do they have a shared set of sounds that they all produce? And the answer seems to be the latter, that they have shared sounds that they all produce. The one that is most commonly produced, and we know it's been recorded on tags attached to both males and females, and from calves up from 6 months of age and older, and recorded in all habitats. And this is referred to as an upcall. It's a very simple upsweep, and I'll just play a sound for you. And this is a signal that is thought to function as a contact call in right whales. And so it's actually one of the most frequent ones we will hear when they're coming into an area. They produce these sounds, and you'll often hear distant upcalls, sort of assumed to be in response to this contact call. There's also a much louder sound that is produced primarily by adult males, but it has been produced by females and recorded from females in situations involving conflict often. And there's a large seasonality to the production of this signal by males. So we think that it may play a role in the reproductive system of North Atlantic right whales. It was dubbed the gunshot sound. And again, I'll warn you that it is quite a loud sound. And so the whale is really just generating that first impulse. And then most of what you see on the spectrogram and most of what you hear is actually the echo of that sound bouncing back from the seafloor in the Bay of Fundy and reverberating in that deep basin. So it's a pretty impressive sound to hear in the wild and also to see a right whale make. They essentially, it's an internally produced sound. It's not from slapping their flippers or their tail in the water, and their whole body jiggles like a bowl of jelly or jello is sort of as the way it's been described. So I've also been curious of how whales use sound in different aspects of their lives. And so from these acoustic tags that were deployed on 35 North Atlantic right whales in the Bay of Fundy, we were able to really tease apart when whales call and when they don't. And so this is a graph that's just showing the call rate per hour on the bottom x-axis, and just a count of the number of individuals in those categories on the y-axis. And so we documented foraging behavior, traveling behavior, social behavior, and rest on the tags. And then we looked at how many calls right whales were making in those behaviors. And so the takeaway is that most right whales are silent when they're actively feeding. This is something that's a bit of a conundrum. When there are a lot of right whales in Cape Cod Bay, most of the time they are eating, but most of the time the call rate of an individual foraging right whale is very, very low. The call rate is close to 0 calls per hour. However, when right whales are in social groups, which they often do multiple times a day, often if it's in an area with a number of right whales in the area, the call rates can exceed 100 or even 500 calls per hour. And so individual whales can make really high call rates when they're socializing, which makes sense. If you think about the sound production in these baleen whales is not echolocation. They're not using it to sense the environment. They're producing this sound specifically for communication with other whales. And so it makes sense that they'll make more sounds when they're in a social setting. Another thing that's of interest, that infographic I showed you from NOAA, a lot of those tools were listening devices to listen for sounds produced by whales. And so for North Atlantic right whales, there's a large number of sensors in the water that are trying to detect that upcall or contact call to determine when right whales might be present in the habitat area. So one of the studies that we did in my group was to see if mothers with young calves would produce that loud upcall as often and as loudly as other right whales. Because pregnant females are the majority of the animals that are migrating south down to the Florida Panhandle and Georgia area, or sorry, the east coast of Florida. And the females with young calves are the majority of the whales that are migrating north. So understanding their calling behavior would give us a sense of how effective passive acoustic monitoring or listening would be to detect them. Unfortunately, from the tag data that we were able to collect off of Florida, females that had a calf, so a lactating female, 90% of their calls were extremely quiet, whisper-like grunts that were very difficult to detect. We had tags on whales so we could detect them, but if we did follows where we had hydrophones, we wouldn't be able to detect those signals even 100 meters away from the mother-calf pair. So we think that the mothers are actually changing their vocal behavior when they have a young calf to essentially acoustically hide from predators, from other potential organisms in the area. This is a nice picture because it shows dolphins had actually come to this mother-calf pair, and the dolphins are very, very loud on the acoustic tags when they come in to investigate the right whales in their habitat. So I wanted to transition to the last part of my talk to talk a little bit about how noise impacts behavior and communication in these species. And so these animals are off the east coast of the United States. They're areas with lots of human activity. And so they have to deal with noise, very, very well illustrated by that a recording of a boat passing with the dolphin in Laela's talk. So I usually think about how animals might deal with noise from ships as sort of dealing with fog as a human that's very visually oriented. So if animals are listening the same way that we're seeing, noise can sort of introduce a fog that obscures their ability to sense the environment. So I can illustrate this with a virtual upcall, and you can sort of mask it with a visual fog of the background noise being introduced. And so there are a couple of ways the whales can change their calls to try to be heard in this. So one is to increase the call duration. We see this in some species, but when you have low frequency noise and low frequency calls, this won't really help. So I sort of X this out. They could shift the frequency of their calls. So actually similar to that motherese, humans have a response, and all mammals that have been investigated have a response where we talk at a higher pitch and louder if we're in a loud environment. So it's also called the cocktail effect. So they could increase their call frequency to get above the ship noise, or they could increase the call amplitude and call more loudly. And so we think that increasing call frequency and increasing call amplitude are a possible solution for right whales. And so using the tag data, we actually were able to measure this. So these are two clips recorded from one North Atlantic right whale. And so the first one has relatively low background noise. You can see it's sort of darker black in the background, so it's quieter. And then the second one on the right was from a different period of the tag. And you can visually also see that the call is a little bit more difficult to see because the background noise has gone up. And so I'll play this. And so listen to the first call and the second call to sort of listen to how a right whale deals with background noise. So hopefully the second call was actually easier for you to hear despite the background noise from a distant ship, because the whale actually increased the amplitude of their call. And when we looked at a number of tags where we had at least 2 calls from individual right whales, remember they don't call much, so it was hard to get, this is what we found. So as the noise goes up, the call intensity went up on the tags. And so essentially the quietest calls were found in the lowest background noise conditions, and the loudest calls were produced in the highest noise conditions. And we didn't see very loud calls when it was quiet, and we never saw quiet calls when it was loud. So it was a very interesting, sort of straightforward documentation that right whales also have this cocktail party effect that you and I have. Another study that was really a long time in coming, it was published in 2012. I was doing my PhD and finishing up my fieldwork in 2001 in the Bay of Fundy, and we were there in September. So I was collaborating with the New England Aquarium. And so I was making recordings of right whales before and after September 11th in 2001 with the terrorist attack in New York. And there was a really rare event that coincided with that terrorist attack, is that all shipping on the East Coast stopped. So all vessels that were in port stayed in port, all vessels coming to port got into port and stayed in port, and nobody left port. And so there were about 2 days that it was essentially a quiet, pristine ocean off the East Coast because of the shutdown of human activity. And so we were able to make recordings to show that a dropout in the low frequency of the noise here after September 11th. So this is all the distant shipping disappearing from their environment. And the Roz Roland from the New England Aquarium was using scat scenting dogs to find whale poop. So this was Fargo. And so he was one of the dogs that she used to find samples of whale poop and measure hormones. And so she was able to actually demonstrate that the stress hormones of right whales in 2001 after September 11th were significantly lower in that sort of later period than in any following year that they were able to study before and after September 11th for stress hormones. And so it suggests that there could be chronic stress in North Atlantic right whales from the exposure to chronic noise in this sort of urbanized habitat. And so I just want to end also, because I always talk about noise and how noise is a problem, but I also want to put it into context because I'm very fascinated in communication. And to me, not being able to communicate is a big deal, but it also has to be put into perspective because there are a lot of things that humans do that unintentionally actually lead to direct death of marine mammals or injury. So fisheries interactions, so getting entangled in fishing gear or getting tied up in a rope, actually kills tens to potentially hundreds of thousands of marine mammals, not just cetaceans, but also pinnipeds because they're air breathing. So if they get caught underwater, they will drown. Vessel collisions are estimated to kill hundreds of whales per year. And this is just incidental. The vessels are just going about their business and the whales are doing theirs. And it's just the intersection between whales and vessels can be fatal. Whereas with sound, I have a question mark. We have limited evidence that any really sound in the ocean from humans has direct mortality events occurring with marine mammals. There are a few examples where there have been events that whales did die in response to very loud sounds in the environment, but those seem to be few and far between. And really the major concerns from noise are habitat loss, so losing that communication space and really having this lead to decreased reproduction and survival. So I just want to sort of leave it with that. And like Laela, I have a whole ocean full of people to thank for 25 years of research. And so a number of institutions and people to thank both in Canada and in the US. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, all three of you. These are such fascinating topics and ideas, and oh my gosh, years and years of research here. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions between each other first, if you have them. Nothing. You all know each other, so I'm sure you were emailing this morning about things that well, we do have one question, and while other people are sort of thinking, Catherine Hunter, thank you for being here, Catherine, has this query. In May 2025, the New York Times reported that humpback whales have poor eyesight and may not be able to see fish nets and boats with which they have fatal encounters. I was surprised by this study because I have only read about echolocation or echolocution. Are collisions with vessels due to the speed of ships? Are whales unable to use echolocution to detect vessels given noise pollution? Is vision useless to identify objects? These are all very interesting. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to tackle that. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So one is that regardless of their vision, so visibility underwater is terrible off the East Coast. And so I often have a slide with a North Atlantic right whale and I put a little bubble around its head. And in most cases, in most parts of the water column where they're migrating, they can't even see their own flipper. So they can't really rely on vision for anything out of their like immediate proximity. And so I think that that's one of the challenges that baleen whales, to our knowledge, they do make some broadband sounds that could potentially have echoes, but they don't produce echolocation the same way that odontocetes do. So their sensing of the environment is more passive listening. And so noise could be an issue with that. There have been a number of really interesting studies that show that speed is an issue for vessel collisions. So bigger the boat and the higher the speed, the higher the injury and risk of death to the whale. So they, once they sense the boat, they need enough time to get out of the way. And so the faster the boat's going, the shorter that window is. And so that's really like a slower boat, they have a chance to get out of the way.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions rolling in here. Nodi is asking, has there been any study of communication between different species of baleen whales? Interesting. Communication between different species of baleen whales.
I'm trying to think of if anyone has, beyond using another species as like a control for a playback experiment. Ironically, the very first thing I ever did as a PhD student was a playback experiment to North Atlantic right whales, and there weren't many recordings. And so I used Southern right whale calls and North Atlantic right whale calls. And this is where the photographs came in handy, because behaviorally it looked the same. The whales all came to the boat. They swam in a straight line to the boat and they were checking out the boat. But when we sorted through the photos, when I played North Atlantic right whale calls, it was all males that came. And when we played Southern right whales, it was males, it was females, it was juveniles, it was the whole gamut of the population that was present in the bay. And so clearly they knew the difference, whether it was an individual that they didn't know and they didn't know it was a species difference, or it was a totally different species that sounds similar. So it's a really interesting question. I think one real challenge that has been interesting is that humpback whales have the ability to learn new vocalizations. And so they have songs that gradually change. And in the past 3 or 4 years, they've added the right whale upcall into their song. And so for passive acoustic monitoring to detect right whales, the analysts don't love it, because now humpback whales are making very difficult to distinguish from right whale sounds. And there are a lot more humpback whales in the same area. So it's a great question.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to know how blue whales and fins find each other, because there are certainly examples of a blue whale getting together with a fin to create a hybrid offspring. But how do they find each other? Is it through sound?
That's amazing. This is all so fascinating. I have a personal question just on what you were just speaking to, Susan. Maybe this is self-explanatory, but what's the difference between a song and a call?
So song is usually what people refer to as sort of a stereotype repetitive sequence of sounds in whales. And I would say that in baleen whales, we call things sounds that are like one sound over and over again, but then we also have complex, dozens of sounds by humpback whales, and they're all called song. And so I think that it's interesting. There's debate of whether the right whale gunshot sound is part of a song, because it's recorded in North Pacific right whales in a pattern. And when you see the whales making these gunshot displays in the North Atlantic, it's very like the whale looks, you can see them from miles away because they're doing weird things. Like they're like waving their flipper around and swimming in circles while they're making these gunshots, very similar to the walrus displays that Bob was talking about earlier. So, there's also tends to be a bias that the song is produced by males. But we do know in bowhead whales, there's been things that are repeated sequences of sounds produced by females. So yeah, there are a lot of cool things. But the calls are everything we don't know what it is. So all of the non-signature whistle versions of sounds in baleen whales are non-song social sounds.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. Well, we have another question from Brittany Elizabeth Stoneberg, who compliments your presentation. Wonderful presentation. When using the drones, how do you account for the noise of the drone itself on the animals? Does that interfere at all with data collection and interpretation?
Yeah, and I can also put that to Laela, because I know you had some overhead video, though I don't know if that was with drone or if it was with sort of more of a aerostat. But at least for us, it's a trade-off, right? So some animals seem to be able to hear the drone. The higher the drone, the less they seem to be able to. It's unclear if they hear it or if they feel the water, because sometimes it'll push the water a little bit when it's going down to tag. But usually the tags dropped from about 6 meters up, so it's pretty high up. And the tags over, like the drones over the whale for, 15 seconds, and then we'll fly away. And so even if it is a little bit disruptive, it's less disruptive than having a boat next to the whale and then having to motor the boat away. And so right now it's a trade-off that, at least for both whale and human safety, it's much safer to have a boat far away from a whale than close to a whale. So
I can just add to that, for our playbacks, we do use drones, but they're quite high up, usually at least 50 to 100 meters. And we can't detect the sound of the drone like on the tag ourselves. And also those dolphins are very urban where I work. So I use those boat passages like that you heard in that example are commonplace for them. So even if there's sort of a little tiny hum from the drone in the background, I guess we feel like it's probably pretty minimal compared to what they're normally exposed to. But it's a really good question, though, and it's possible that in other study sites, the noise from a drone could be more impactful if it's something that they're really not used to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. We have some more specific questions coming in. Nadia is asking, I'm going to Tonga in September to observe humpbacks. Can you recommend a source of information on humpback songs?
putting me on the spot. I can tell you scientific papers. That's probably maybe not what you want. I mean, the famous one is by Roger Payne, from a science article that first described song, which is a great paper. And but there are a lot of really great documentaries that address humpback whale behavior and song. There was one that I feel like it's out right now. But off the top of my head, I don't remember. But I think if you search for ocean documentaries about whale song, there are quite a few really good ones.
And Catherine Hunter has another specific question about whether you have a partnership with the Macaulay Collection at Cornell. If yes, please give an example. I'm not aware.
So I was an undergraduate at Cornell, and so I actually started my career at the Lab of Ornithology Bioacoustics program. It's now the Laela Sayigh Center for Conservation Bioacoustics, which is across the hall from the Macaulay Library. So the Center for Conservation Bioacoustics really works on developing tools for studying sound. And so for me, it's been wonderful because my career started in the lab that built the software for analyzing sound. And then I went and did my PhD at Woods Hole to study the hardware for collecting the data. And so, I've been surrounded by wonderful engineers and computer programmers my whole career that, love animals. And so I love sitting at that's why, I love the drone tagging aspect too, right? Any new technology that we can improve to learn more about these animals and minimize our impact on them, I think is really wonderful. So yeah, and the Cornell Macaulay collection has a great collection of acoustic recordings for every species from everywhere on Earth.
So interesting. Well, if there are no further questions, I hesitate because this is such a fantastic rich conversation. I feel like I've learned so much, and my cat is telling me it's time to go. I was thinking a lot about vocal and nonverbal communication during that as he's scratching at the door. I really, really just want to thank you, all three of you, so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. This is such a wonderful opportunity to engage in conversation and speak to some very relevant ideas and research. And thank you so much for being here with us virtually. So virtual round of applause for everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And just on a very final note, I want to remind everybody, everyone is invited to our big summer exhibition opening this Friday at the New Bedford Whaling Museum at 5:30 for our Cape Verdean contemporary shows. And there you can also see Perry Lynch Howard's work as well. And I also want to plug next local history guilds will be this September, topic TBD, but that'll be on Tuesday, September 9th. And also mark your calendars for our few of my favorite things December edition of Local History Guild, which will introduce some of our collections and curatorial team members speaking on their favorite things from the collection. And that'll be on Tuesday, December 9th. So thank you, everybody, so much for being here. And please do be in touch. These are great opportunities for connection and conversation. So with that, I think we'll close. Take care.
Susan and Laela, thank you both.
You're
This was great.
welcome.
Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
And Nathan behind the scenes.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody. All right. Have a good night. Enjoy. Until the next. Take care.